morning, Tobago. On Tobago Updates, viewers, we are being joined this morning by the beautiful Councillor Petal Daniel-Benoit, Minority Councillor in the house today. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Kandace. It's really a pleasure to be here. Good morning, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and everyone who is viewing and listening us. Special good morning.
Great to have you. Now, we are into some conversations here centered around misbehavior in the House of Assembly. So let's get started. When you speak about misbehavior, are you speaking about one particular incident or are you speaking about a collective of incidents?
Well, when we speak about misbehavior, we actually speak into the special sitting particularly. And of course, there are a number of incidents that would have occurred at the special sitting. And we had some outbursts from members. We had some quote unquote, what you want to call it, marks being burst, for want of a better word. But for me, and I think generally, you would hear persons speaking to the fact that what transpired at the sit-in was a bit disappointing, disturbing, and to some extent, it may have been or it was an abuse of parliamentary privilege. As you are aware, the House is currently on recess, and we are in recess during this period, the first week in July until the first week in September. And the House can be recalled from recess for reasons of an extraordinary or urgent nature. So the House was recalled while we were on recess, and when you looked at the order paper and the notice that we received, less than 24 hours was basically giving information that the Chief Secretary intended to make a statement. The standing orders provides for statement by the Chief Secretary and Assistant Secretary, Secretaries and Assistant Secretary, and the standing order was utilized to allow for the Chief Secretary to make his statement. What also should be noted is that the standing orders requires that secretaries or assistant secretaries making a statement should only speak for 10 minutes. However, it also provides for the suspension of the standing orders, and that was done to allow for the Chief Secretary to speak to the full end of his statement. Mm-hmm. What was concerning is that when the minority leader raised on a similar motion to allow for, because the standing orders only provides as well for one question from each party on the opposition side. So when the minority leader requested and moved a motion to allow for additional questions, and it was a minimum of 3 questions, that was not approved, it was shut down. The majority side did not vote in favor. And, it begs the question, what was the real motive for coming to the House on that day to abuse parliamentary privilege? And in that malign, slander, bring into disrepute senior officials of state. Mm-hmm. So for us, it was quite disturbing, it was alarming, and it is a cause for concern.
Now, have you been in a situation where you were under you got information in the same way that the Chief Secretary got of this plot? What would have been your what would have been your modem for translating this information to the public? Because on one hand you could understand the Chief Secretary wanting some protection to share this information, but at the same time there's also the question as to whether or not he should have done it there or what other action he should have taken.
So thank you for that question, because the standing order provides for motions to be laid in the House. Mm-hmm. However, what the Chief Secretary did was out of order. The standing order and the THA Act also provides for privileges for members of the House. but this is subject to the rules of the House. And one of the rules of the House indicates that no member of parliament, the president, members of the judiciary, members of the assembly, persons involved in the administration of justice, their conduct should not be brought to question unless it's a substantive motion. So if the chief secretary wanted discussions on the conduct of these individuals, then he should have brought a motion. He should have brought a motion outlining what his issues are. And it would have allowed also other members in the House to participate in the debate and share their views. But that was not done. Also, there are various arms of state that, in my view, the chief secretary could have addressed his concerns. And one in particular is the Police Complaints Authority. They are the ones, the chief secretary had an issue with the TTPS and how they are managing this exercise. It is my information that, and public information, that the Police Complaints Authority are the ones that deal with issues surrounding police officers and the way in which they conduct themselves. So it's not what is done, but it's how it's done. So you use parliamentary privilege, not allowing the minority, not allowing anybody else to have a voice or to have a say. You brought a statement, and again, it's a cause for concern. It's not what you do, but it's how you do what you do. And even in the debate, even in the presentation of the statement, one of the things the chief secretary indicated is to call the magistrate that issued the search warrant ignorant and whatever he called him. And there was outcry from the minority side of the House. And in response to the outcry, the chief secretary uttered, "Hush your stink mouth." Is that the way to deal with issues? Even if you are in a heated debate, even if you are in a disagreement, as the presiding officer said, it's an honorable House. And you are to deal with members of the House. And you are to deal generally with decorum, professionalism, self-control. So yes, I agree that, you will be triggered. Things will happen that you will not like. But is it that you just throw caution to the wind and do as you please?
But some would say that perhaps sometimes the minority leader isn't always that, let me say, accommodating, because, sometimes you see it from both sides in the House. Sometimes the minority interrupts. A lot of the times whenever there are speakers, and, he has to be advised or led from the presiding officer.
Right. And on both sides of the House, there are interruption. And I guess that is what happens in the Parliament, even in the Tobago House of Assembly. But again, it's how you deal with it. And the presiding officer is there to maintain conduct, to maintain order. So you can seek the protection of the presiding officer if you feel that you are being overly interrupted and you can't get your point across. So there are ways in dealing with things.
Now, in terms of the misbehavior, so you mentioned a few things. Of course, some of the outbursts that were made. You mentioned the fact that the standing order was abused. It wasn't used for the purpose that is outlined in the act, and so on. So, what action is a minority prepared to take against this?
Well, we are in discussions. However, the minority leader would have signaled that consideration is being given to bringing a motion of no confidence in the presiding officer. And this is basically as a result, and I guess a culmination of what would have transpired, because as I would have indicated, the presiding officer is there to maintain order in the House. There were a number of breaches in the standing order. To present a statement, as I would have indicated, this requires approval from the presiding officer. The presiding officer ought to have seen the statement, vetted the statement, and give approval to reading of the statement. The statement also should have been read verbatim. And we would have seen, while in the chief secretary's presentation, that he was going off his script, he was ad-libbing in a number of instances. We would have also seen where, based on the statement that was read and presented, that again, the Chief Secretary would have brought senior members of state in their conduct into disrepute. And based on the standing orders, that is out of order. He would have also brought video clippings of basically a stranger to the house. And the Chief Secretary also in his statement would have indicated that the comment from this whistleblower is unverified. But these are words of this stranger bringing into disrepute, calling the conduct of the Prime Minister, the police commissioner, a magistrate, members who are engaged in the administration of justice. So it's a clear breach of the standing order. So we are seeking advice, and again, the minority leader would have signaled that it's the intention of the minority to seek redress in that matter.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, viewers, we are going to be continuing our conversation with Minority Councillor Petal Daniel-Benoit, so don't go anywhere.
Tobago updates. Tobago updates. Good morning, Tobago. Wake up.
Welcome back to Good Morning Tobago on Tobago Updates. Viewers, we are continuing our conversations this morning with Minority Councillor Petal Daniel-Benoit as we discuss misbehavior in the House of Assembly. So I'm loving the title this morning. But Ms. Petal Daniel-Benoit, before we went to the break, he was speaking about some of the contents of the statement made by the Chief Secretary last week, and that because they brought into disrepute or they attacked the reputation of some of the highest holders in our land, that sort of invalidates what the Chief Secretary said. Is that correct?
No, I am not saying that. I am saying that the method in which the Chief Secretary went about bringing his information was inappropriate.
Okay.
Yes, and if the Chief Secretary wanted to bring the conduct of these persons into question, then he should have brought a substantive motion. Because the Chief Secretary also in his statement would have indicated that he would have used Emailgate as the genesis for bringing this thing. But when you listen to the Prime Minister in his press conference, and the Prime Minister and everyone else who was questioned or addressed by the Chief Secretary's statement would have immediately come out and refute categorically all the claims. And if we go back to the suggestion or the indication that the Chief Secretary made that he was using Emailgate, the Prime Minister in his press conference would have shown clearly what transpired with Emailgate. And the Prime Minister indicated that he would have received information. He took the information to the President, requesting that the President communicate with the Integrity Commission. After some time, I think it was a month or so, when he recognized and he followed up, there was nothing from the Integrity Commission. He felt that it was important, so he brought a motion to the House. And the motion basically was a no confidence motion in the Prime Minister and in the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So he would have brought the Prime Minister's conduct into question, but he brought it on a substantive motion. And it allowed for members of the government to bring a rebuttal, to comment, to speak, to debate on the motion. In this instance, that was not done. And even when an attempt was made to ask additional questions based on the standing orders, that was shut down. So if the Chief Secretary wanted to bring the conduct of these persons into question, he should have done it properly, bringing a motion which I would allow for persons, and that would allow both sides of the House to debate and to discuss and to share their points of view.
But now that information is out there, and as you said, that it wasn't the right way for it to come about, at least in the House within that particular standing order. How should the country itself, how should governmental institutions handle that information that was laid in the house?
Well, if the chief secretary feels and the chief secretary has not provided any evidence or anything to substantiate, and by his own words, he has indicated that he has no evidence to substantiate. So he brought a stranger, a whistleblower. He would have possibly endangered the life of this gentleman, because since then we would have seen on the daily newspaper where the whistleblower would have indicated that he is basically on the run for his life because persons are attempting to find him and reach him, or whatever is the case. What I would say is that if there is any merit, we have seen where all the persons in question would have categorically denied the claims. If there is any merit, there are institutions of state that can deal with the matter, that can deal with the matters raised. And I am thinking whatever information, whatever evidence that the chief secretary and his administration have, I will urge him to take it to the relevant authorities. But Kandace, we have to go back to the genesis of all of this. What is the genesis of all that is transpiring? And the genesis basically is an audio recording that has found itself in the public domain. And the audio recording is basically, we are hearing voices known to us of high-ranking THU officials conspiring to use public funds for their own political agenda. And based on the audio recording, it says that they are seeking to use public funds to spread propaganda.
But even that, though, that's still, I mean, it's one part of the clip. It's not the entire conversation, because as the chief secretary said, the chief secretary admitted that, yes, we had that conversation, but we didn't act on it. We just discussed it.
And conspiracy is also a crime. So if you go back to the video recording, and I would have had cause to go back and play the video recording, the chief secretary, and I would have also taken some notes, because the chief secretary and his team, first, he did not recognize whether or not it was an executive council meeting. So in his first response, he spoke to this being an executive council meeting and having cover under the executive council meeting. With the whistleblower coming forward, the whistleblower would have indicated to him that it was really not an executive council meeting. So does that mean, or can you infer that these discussions happen regularly with the chief secretary and his team, discussing, conspiring how to use public funds? Because if it would have occurred once, I think you may have tried to decipher exactly where it would have happened. So in the first instance, you thought it was executive council. The chief secretary, even before coming to the public after 23 days, 3 weeks or so, the chief secretary would have brought his entire executive council, in my opinion, into disrepute, saying that his executive council would have been cleared. But I want to go back to the audio recording. And the audio recording spoke to the fact that they want to use propaganda, and the propaganda machine must be covert and deadly, and that he distinguished between the propaganda machine and PR, and that PR is generally to do with the nice things, and they will PR will do press releases and press conferences, and you will call the media, but you need a propaganda machinery, and you need it sooner rather than later. And then you heard another voice chiming in, basically confirming, yes, you need a commerce committee. And then you heard voices speaking to the fact that, we would have started doing something because persons would have gotten, and they called a name, an S name, they would have gotten to this person, and we only need a certain number to do the PR, and the other persons could do the propaganda. And we have already had 13, I think is the number, and we only need 7 more. If you really listen to the conversations intently, that does not appear as if something did not happen.
Well, I mean, and we're hoping to see from the investigations as well if it really did or if it didn't.
Correct. And I am urging members of the public to go back because this recording is in the public domain and gather your own information. Do your research, listen, come up to your own interpretation and stop allowing persons to shape the narrative. The information is in the public domain. And as a result of this information in the public domain, two organizations, independent organizations of state, would have indicated to the public that they are in the process of launching investigations. In the instance of the Integrity Commission, we heard in the public domain via the news channels that they said that they have gotten information and they are going to pursue investigation. We also heard with the TTPS initially that they were in communication with the police commissioner as well as the DPP, and they are going to pursue investigations into the matter. And I see all of this as being police work.
But I mean, there's also the case where even going back past before the audio gate, there was also this claim from one of the contractors named in this whole situation, saying that he would stop at nothing to get his money.
Right. So I am saying if there is evidence, if there is information of wrongdoing, take it to the relevant authorities and let them do their work.
But then the chief secretary would also say that he took some information to the police, and there was some death threats, and I mean he did present some evidence of some threats and attacks that not just he or members of the executive council, but some of the senior public officers in the THA got for this money, and that is sort of the whole genesis of this thing coming to being.
But Kandace, if you also recall that when the chief secretary made that statement, the TTPS also came out and indicated, and I would have heard that via the news, and I think the public would have heard, the TTPS indicated that they received no such reports. So then the chief secretary is saying one thing, the TTPS is saying the other thing. Who do you believe? And if the TTPS is saying no reports, no information was brought to them, on what basis are they going to investigate these reports?
All right, no problem. Okay, so I just want to thank you so much, Ms. Petal Daniel-Benoit, for being on with us and for sharing with us this information. And we're certainly looking forward, and it's going to be interesting when the House reconvenes in September to see what comes out of all of these allegations. All right, so thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, and happy Emancipation Day, Trinidad and Tobago.
Certainly, and we're going to be getting into some of those conversations up next because we are going to be joined by Mr. Jesse Taylor. So don't go anywhere.
And the vibes is never